Alright, good morning YouTube. In today's video, we are going to be continuing the size series. In my previous video, I talked about how powerlifting is not the best for hypertrophy. But I'm going to follow that up with this video. Why the squat, bench, and deadlift are still great for hypertrophy, and by extension, any barbell lift. So let's get into it. First and foremost, it's important to recognize that the big three do not belong to powerlifting. The movements that are used in the sport don't necessarily mean that that's the only way, reason, or purpose of that movement. The movements are used in powerlifting are then optimized for the goal of lifting the most amount of weight. And if you can optimize an exercise to lift the most amount of weight, you can definitely optimize that same exercise to build the most amount of muscle.
Mr. Krabs, what do we do?
Here, use this!
When you have a different intent behind a movement, you yourself will be the person who decides how effective it is and in what direction it's kind of going. You, the lifter, are responsible to figure out, are you cheating your form or are you changing your form to get the most amount of weight on the bar? Or are you doing it in a way to stimulate the muscle you're trying to hit? That distinction is not the fault of the exercise, it's the responsibility of you, the lifter. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are thinking to yourself, I'm going to make this movement optimized to lift the most amount of weight, and then you're kind of surprised when lifting the most amount of weight and all the changes you've made to accomplish that goal don't give you the best size results, then you're kind of fooling yourself. If you are going to use these movements and recognize that you need to make some modifications so that way they are more bodybuilding specific, then that's what you will get out of that exercise. It's up to you. In one of my other videos where I talked about S tier exercises, like a tier list exercise, right? There's, in my opinion, something goes into S tier because of you. The lift itself is not, it doesn't inherently have the qualities of an S tier exercise. I say this with a kind of like biting my tongue or tongue in cheek, because I do think that there are some exercises that will just work really, really well for most people. But there's some assumptions with it that kind of go along with it, which is why I'm making this point. For something to be an S tier exercise, you yourself have to make it that way. How do you train it? How do you progress it? How patient are you with that movement? How proficient are you with that movement? Those are all things that will determine at which point in time in your training life, training career, the utility of that exercise. And none of those things are determined whether or not it belongs to powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, strongman, or anything. Bodybuilding is a sport of trying to hypertrophy by any means necessary, and the big three are still very useful lifts, and they do not belong to powerlifting. They were used by bodybuilders first, and that means that they can be used for bodybuilding today. Look at all the silver era guys. They did almost exclusively barbell work. They did a lot of machine work, but there weren't that many machines at the time, so for the most part, I think it was kind of like lat pull downs, cable rows, and the stuff of that nature, some chest flies and whatnot. But for the most part, a lot of their training was still barbell based. So rest assured that this is still a very viable way to train. The next point I want to make is that there are two very different conversations that I think need to be looked at a bit differently or need to be seen as different conversations. Size and strength is a very different conversation than bodybuilding and powerlifting. So whether you are a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, you have to use both size and strength to accomplish your final goal. The methods you use will differ. The exercises you use will differ because powerlifting is exercise specific, but they are fairly different. Size and strength is very similar to one another, but how they express themselves with your final goal of bodybuilding or powerlifting, that's where the difference lies. Now, some people are going to say things like, oh, just progressive overload, bro, and, you know, congratulations, you just solved world hunger and, like, gave us the cure to cancer, like, you are a goddamn genius. Progressive overload is a feature of both size and strength training or bodybuilding and powerlifting, but Progressive overload comes in many forms, and some are more useful than others depending on your personal goal. There are things that you do in bodybuilding that would be much a better use of your time than this trying to linearly progress every single week and add a load to the bar. There are much better uses of your time if your goal is hypertrophy, and much better uses of your time if your goal is powerlifting. There's a reason why there is a difference between how they train, and it's for the optimization of that goal. Now, with that being said, they might use the same exercises, but they won't use them in the same way. And that's why it's up to you to make sure you do it properly. Powerlifting, like I mentioned, is exercise specific, but bodybuilding is not. But just because you don't have to do something, that isn't a sufficient reason to not do that thing. You don't have to save money. You don't have to take care of your health. You don't have to do the barbell lifts to get big. But it probably would benefit you to at least do those things. When it comes to the principles of hypertrophy, the barbell, and you yourself, you have to recognize the relationship of all those things. It doesn't make sense that the principles of hypertrophy, mechanical tension, muscle damage, metabolic stress, and all the other ways that we can have a good inkling of how to induce it, it doesn't make sense that any of these principles would work any less because you use a barbell. The barbell lifts are not any better, but they're also not any worse than any other modality of training. So then that's where you come in as the lifter. You should try the barbell lifts, see how useful they are for you, and if they are incredibly useful, then keep going with them. To systematically and categorically get rid of an entire piece of equipment just because your favorite influencer said so is only going to hurt you in the long run. You have to examine how the barbell affects you. It might be the best thing that's ever happened to you.
I'm always gonna love you no matter what. No matter what happens. You're my son, you're my blood. You're the best thing in my life. But until you start believing in yourself, you ain't gonna have a life.
And it might not work for you at all, and that's fine.
Know your fucking place, trash.
But you yourself have to figure that out, because in one scenario where you just completely get rid of it, you might have just be getting rid of something that would be very useful to you. And in the case that you're right, well, you just will never know, and it's going to be in the back of your mind. And then you will find out fairly quickly that once you start using it, it might not be the best thing for you for whatever reasons. Maybe you're built, maybe your build, your joints, your whatever it is. Whatever you need to accomplish, you should use whatever goals you have at your disposal. So why should you use a barbell? First and foremost, because it works. Mechanical tension is one of the main drivers of hypertrophy, and barbells are a very useful tool to do that. So are machines, so are cables, so are dumbbells, so are many other pieces of equipment. But like I said, you deciding to systematically and categorically get rid of an entire plethora of different exercises just because of the implement that they're on is entirely stupid, and this line of reasoning applies to anything else too. If you are trying to get bigger, you shouldn't be so stubborn and think to yourself that, oh, I can get all the size gains from barbells. You likely can't, because there are issues with barbell training. It does have a very high raw stimulus magnitude, as many of you who watch Mike Isertel or Renaissance Periodization would say. But there is the fact that for most people, it will cause a lot of damage on your joints, connective tissues, and you will have to supplement it with your machine work, your dumbbell work, your cable work, which is just more friendly on the muscles and your recovery. But with that being said, that doesn't mean all of your training should come from that, because you will be getting some of the best stimulus from the barbell. As I mentioned earlier in the video, you can also modify the movement to better match your goals, which in this case is hypertrophy. So let's look at the squat, bench, and deadlift, right? If you have a hypertrophy goal, I would argue that a high bar squat, a front squat, a safety bar squat, and maybe even Smith machine or hack squats would be a much better use of your time than low bar. Will you grow muscle from low bar training? Yes. Are they going to be, is it optimized for hypertrophy? It kind of depends on what you mean by that, because if you are squatting for quads, maybe not the best choice. When it comes to the deadlift, I think that while you can grow muscle from both conventional and sumo, the muscle you're growing from either would be better done with other pieces of equipment. So let's look at the conventional. If you're trying to build your posterior chain, your lower back, your glutes, your hamstrings, you should do stiff leg deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts. If you're trying to build your hip adductors and abductors, then I think you might have a better time using the good girl, bad girl machine, and also your squats will build that muscle fairly well. The next point with the bench press is that the bench press is a bodybuilding exercise. When it comes to the 3 power lifts, powerlifters who kind of know their stuff, I would say, recognize that the bench press of the 3 lifts is the least technical, the least taxing on your recovery. It's the one where you can really just unga bunga, whereas with the squat and deadlift, they tend to have to be a bit more precise. Furthermore, when it comes to barbell training, you are not locked into a machine. So if a machine is not built for you, you can build a barbell lift to be better for you, or you can perform the barbell lift to be better for you, because you have more control about how that lift affects your muscles. So for example, with the bench press, obviously you can manipulate your form to make it better for strength, using more leg drive, using more arch, tucking your scapula, and putting your back into your pockets, like to make it more optimized for strength. But if you took a more relaxed form, your feet are just there to balance you, or maybe not even there at all, like in a feet up bench or Larson press, and then you relax your arch, like a minimal arch to just stay safe, or maybe no arch at all, and then no retraction or very little, just enough to stay safe and injury free. That would be a much better lift for hypertrophy, and that's how silver era bodybuilders and bodybuilders in the past used to bench, and they developed great pecs as a result. So it works, right? So you also might find that the barbell, like I mentioned before, will stimulate you like nothing else, because it's just raw stimulus. It's just hitting your muscles hard as all hell, and it might be just as valid, just as useful as a machine, maybe more so. But I would argue that it would probably be a lot better than those hyper-targeted isolation exercises that just don't hit the muscle that hard. So for example, I don't think you can develop a full pec, like your pecs completely, if all you do are chest flies and all the different angles of them. I think at some point in time, you just need to hit that muscle with the most amount of stimulus as you possibly can, and that would be a lot better. I think when it comes to a lot of the more recent training methods coming out right now, we are like, imagine your muscle is a plant. It's a plant. Think of it as a plant. You want to water it with the amount of water it needs to grow, right? And maybe it's better to use a hose or that pitcher, but instead you decide to use that syringe where you're just trying to put a single drop of water on that plant precisely on the seed or on the leaf or on the roots, instead of trying to just use a more potent stimulus. Obviously, it's very easy to drown the plant in that situation, but at the same time, you're not understimulating it either. So those are some reasons as to why you should use a barbell. So in conclusion, the utility of a tool is dependent on you, the user. This means that you might be able to make it super amazing for yourself, but it can also mean that the implement or the tool or the piece of equipment is just not meant for you. And that's fine, but you should figure that out and not just let someone tell you it's good, it's bad, without you yourself trying to figure that out. The more skilled you are, the more intentful you are in your practice, the more methodological you are in your approach, the better that tool can be. But like I said, the responsibility falls on you. The more aware you are of yourself, the better you can find methods that suit you, and the barbell will fit in that, whether you like it or not. So I would recommend you use it. Figure out if it's good for you, and if it's not, then feel no shame. I'm not gonna pressure you into using something that's not working for you, but at the same time, I would very highly bet that it's gonna work very well for you. So thank you so much for watching this video. Have a great day.